They said it was just a friendly favor. A simple, harmless gesture. Lend your private jet to friends. But what happens when that gesture turns into a nightmare no one could have predicted? Picture this. Elton John, the rocket man himself, meticulously checks every detail of his pristine jet, every switch, every dial, every luxurious seat, knowing the plane is his sanctuary, a place where control reigns supreme. And then, he hands it over to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. Sounds innocent, right? But as soon as that plane lifted off the tarmac, the world as he knew it began to unravel. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Did they realize what they were stepping into? Did they understand the weight of borrowing not just a plane, but a symbol of trust and privilege? The jet wasn't just a vehicle. It was a statement. Every detail, from the soft leather seats to the champagne stocked in the minibar, was curated, safeguarded, almost sacred. And yet, for reasons no one could explain at the time, the engine began to overheat, alarms blared, and somewhere along the way, a car went missing. Yes, a car. One of Elton's prized vehicles disappeared from the hangar, leaving a void of chaos that would ripple far beyond the airport runway. But let's step back. Why does this matter to you? Why should you care about a billionaire, a prince, and a duchess in the sky? Because this story isn't just about luxury jets or missing property. It's about trust betrayed, alliances shattered, and the chaos that erupts when celebrities, power, and entitlement collide. Social media exploded, headlines ran wild, and the world watched as what should have been a private favor turned into a public spectacle. This isn't fiction. This is the collision of celebrity culture and royal privilege, and it's far more dramatic than anyone anticipated. Now, imagine the scene. Meghan and Harry, mid-flight, realizing the engine's warning lights are flashing. Panic sets in. The crew is scrambling. Instructions are barked. Decisions must be made in seconds. And all the while, Elton John, back on the ground, watches the feed in horror, realizing that his property, and perhaps more importantly, his trust, has been compromised. It's a situation so intense, so fraught with tension, that even Hollywood scripts would struggle to capture the magnitude of it. And then came the missing car, the one that should have been waiting at the destination. Gone. Vanished. Questions swirled. Was it theft? Misplacement? Or worse, negligence on the part of the passengers? Every theory was more shocking than the last. And while the media began speculating, Elton John's reaction was swift and unyielding. There would be no second chances, no explanations, just a clean, definitive cutoff that left Meghan and Harry blindsided. But the story doesn't end there. Because in the wake of the jet disaster, social media erupted in ways that no one could have foreseen. Memes, hashtags, and viral posts painted a picture of entitlement, carelessness, and celebrity meltdown. Was it fair? Perhaps not. But in a world where every move of royalty is scrutinized, perception quickly becomes reality. And as the world debated, the consequences were quietly stacking behind the scenes: financial, emotional, and reputational. Every text, every private message, every call was a thread in a web that was rapidly tightening. Now, think about the stakes. This wasn't just a jet or a car. This was the intersection of global fame, personal relationships, and public scrutiny. A single misstep could, and did, reverberate across continents. Friends were turning into critics, allies into adversaries. Every whispered conversation and leaked message became ammunition in a battle no one had signed up for. And the fallout would be felt far beyond the airport runway, far beyond the walls of Elton John's estate, and far beyond the initial panic of a jet in distress. Have you ever wondered how someone manages to go from being welcome guests to social pariahs overnight? That's exactly what happened here. And while the headlines captured the chaos, they barely scratched the surface of the full story. Inside the jet, what they encountered, the decisions they made, and the mistakes that followed were all part of a domino effect that no one could stop. Every detail mattered, every choice compounded the problem, and every reaction escalated the drama. So let's pause and ask, what would you do if you were in their position? You have power, wealth, and access to luxuries beyond most people's imagination. But with those privileges come responsibility, accountability, and the unrelenting gaze of the public eye. One wrong move, one lapse in judgment, And suddenly, you're not just facing embarrassment. You're facing a media storm, the wrath of a celebrity, and the fracture of trust that can never be repaired. And as the plane finally touched down, the reality became undeniable. The engine damage, the missing car, the frantic calls, the viral videos. All of it pointed to a truth that could no longer be ignored. Elton John was done. He cut them off. And with that action, the dynamics of celebrity friendship, royal influence, and personal consequence were forever altered. The fallout was inevitable. The questions, unrelenting. The intrigue, insatiable. But here's the kicker. Just when the world thought it had seen everything, the overheating engine, the missing car, the social media frenzy, there was a revelation that no one expected. A single private message, leaked at the perfect moment, shifted the narrative entirely. Allegiances were questioned, reputations teetered on the edge, and the drama escalated to a level that even seasoned tabloids struggled to report. Every twist led to another, and every answer only generated more questions. What would you do if someone asked to borrow your private jet? Not for a quick hop across town, not for a film shoot, not even for a vacation, but for a royal journey with the world watching every move? Imagine the scenario. You're Elton John, your name synonymous with extravagance and precision, and the guests requesting this favor are none other than Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. Would you hesitate? Or would you trust the veneer of friendship, thinking that etiquette and respect will carry the day? Elton, ever the meticulous planner, didn't just hand over the keys and hope for the best. He scrutinized every detail. He ensured the jet was immaculate, polished seats, stocked champagne, state-of-the-art navigation systems checked and rechecked. The private jet wasn't just transportation. It was a fortress of luxury, a floating palace that reflected the owner's exacting taste. And yet, for all the precision and planning, there was a catch. Once Meghan and Harry stepped on board, a series of missteps began that would escalate faster than anyone could anticipate. The invitation was framed as a friendly gesture, a favor among friends, a moment of mutual respect between two icons of culture and royalty. But as the countdown to departure approached, the tension quietly built beneath the surface. Elton knew the stakes. A royal misstep, a technical error, or a social faux pas could explode into headlines, gossip columns, and viral social media posts overnight. The day of departure arrived with all the pomp and precision that only celebrity culture could generate. A convoy of cars lined the tarmac, paparazzi hovering just outside the designated zones, cameras primed for the slightest hint of drama. Meghan and Harry arrived, impeccably dressed, smiles poised for the press. They waved, they laughed, they exuded the effortless charm expected of royalty. But beneath the surface, nervous energy crackled. Perhaps they sensed the responsibility they had assumed. Perhaps they didn't. Either way, as they ascended the jet steps, a subtle tension clung to the air, almost invisible, yet unmistakably present. On board, the jet seemed like a dream. Plush seats, mood lighting, an interior so sleek it felt like stepping into a private palace. Champagne chilled, music curated, and crew members prepared to cater to every whim. But amid the luxury, small cracks began to appear. A conversation in hushed tones, a question of seating arrangements, a casual disregard for certain operational protocols, seemingly minor at first, but each one a thread in a slowly unraveling tapestry. And then came the first unexpected signal that things weren't as smooth as they appeared. The co-pilot, discreet but firm, noted a small anomaly in the engine readings. Nothing catastrophic, yet. Nothing to suggest an immediate emergency, but enough to raise a subtle flag. It was the first sign that this borrowed jet, while perfect in design, was now vulnerable to human error. And human error, when mixed with entitlement and inexperience, can escalate faster than any alarm system can warn. Meghan and Harry, accustomed to privilege but not always to technical nuance, interacted with the crew in ways that reflected confidence but occasionally crossed into oversight. They were not malicious, not careless in intent. But their aura of entitlement, amplified by decades of public attention, set the stage for complications. And Elton, watching from the sidelines through discreet monitoring, could feel the tension building. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it is almost impossible to mend. The first hour of the flight passed with relative calm, though small incidents began to accumulate. A misaligned beverage cart, a minor dispute over seating, subtle miscommunications between crew members, small sparks that hinted at a potential wildfire. And then, the engine warning lights began their quiet, insistent glow. At first, it was easy to dismiss, a temporary fluctuation, perhaps, or a minor technical glitch. But as the minutes passed, the readings grew more concerning, more persistent. Panic, the kind that starts small and grows in waves, began to ripple through the cabin. The crew followed protocol, issuing calm instructions to Meghan and Harry, but the tension was palpable. Imagine being thousands of feet above the ground, in a vehicle that represents not just luxury but trust, and realizing that something is wrong. The initial confidence evaporated. Every choice, every decision, every casual disregard for protocol now had consequences. And as the jet approached its cruising altitude, the weight of responsibility settled on everyone on board. Meghan, always poised in public, showed subtle signs of anxiety. Tightened jaw, restless hands, eyes darting toward the co-pilot for reassurance. Harry, protective yet frustrated, attempted to mediate between crew instructions and passenger comfort, inadvertently adding layers of confusion. What should have been a straightforward journey now carried the electric charge of potential disaster. Meanwhile, on the ground, Elton John paced, monitoring every metric, every communication. He understood the gravity of the situation. His property, his trust, his reputation were all on the line. And then came the first external sign that the crisis wasn't contained. A call from the tarmac. One of his vehicles, a car meant to meet Meghan and Harry at their destination, was missing. Gone. Vanished. The initial panic in the cabin was now mirrored by alarm on the ground. The pieces of the puzzle were falling apart in real time, faster than anyone could react. Social media, ever vigilant, had already begun to notice. Images of the jet, its distinctive markings, were shared with speculation, curiosity, and barely contained amusement. In the age of instant information, every moment was under scrutiny. A minor misstep could be amplified into global headlines, turning a simple favor into a scandal that would dominate news cycles. And within that digital storm, trust was eroding and reputations were at risk. At this point, the question arises. How do you manage responsibility when the stakes are sky high and the participants are accustomed to deference? Meghan and Harry, accustomed to navigating royal protocols and media attention, were suddenly faced with technical, logistical, and social challenges that demanded precision, patience, and humility. And for all their experience, this scenario demanded more than charm. It demanded skill. Yet, amid the tension, human errors compounded. A wrong button pressed, a misinterpreted instruction, a casual disregard for subtle technical cues. Each one added layers to the unfolding crisis. The jet, elegant and powerful, was now at the mercy of human fallibility. Every second mattered. Every choice carried weight. The very act of borrowing a jet, seemingly innocent, had become a high-stakes drama in midair. As the flight continued, the psychological pressure mounted. Meghan and Harry, aware that every move could be judged, tried to maintain composure, but the crew's concern was evident. Passengers rarely experience such a combination of luxury and danger. The dichotomy between comfort and crisis created tension that radiated through the cabin. Even the calmest gestures, pouring a drink, adjusting a seat, asking a question, became fraught with implications. And then came the realization that the consequences were not just technical or logistical. They were deeply personal. Elton John's trust, extended as a favor, was being tested in ways that no amount of protocol could prevent. Privilege and responsibility collided, exposing cracks in behavior, judgment, and the human tendency to assume that access equals entitlement. The borrowed jet, once a symbol of generosity, now carried the weight of betrayal. The first signs of real alarm occurred when minor technical issues escalated to a point where crew intervention became urgent. Instructions were given sharply. Warnings were issued. The calm, poised atmosphere dissolved into one of tension, whispered commands, and nervous glances. Every decision now had the potential to be the difference between controlled precaution and full-blown disaster. By the time the jet began its descent, the cabin atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Anxiety replaced ease, urgency replaced casual conversation, and the reality of the borrowing, of stepping into a world of responsibility without preparation, became undeniably clear. The engine readings fluctuated unpredictably. Crew members exchanged concerned glances, and Meghan and Harry, though composed externally, felt the pressure mounting. And just as the plane's wheels touched the runway, another shock awaited. The car meant to greet them, a seemingly simple logistical detail, was nowhere to be found. Panic, frustration, and embarrassment collided. The missing car wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a public signal, a visible emblem of mismanagement, and a moment that would be endlessly scrutinized online. At this point, the friendly favor had transformed completely. A borrowed jet had become a symbol of trust broken, a sequence of escalating errors, and a drama that would dominate headlines. Elton John's reaction was swift, decisive, and irreversible. The moment the plane doors closed, the consequences were already rippling outward, beyond the tarmac, beyond social media, beyond personal relationships. The first domino had fallen. And just when everyone thought the ordeal might be contained, technical issues managed, a car eventually found, social media chatter dissipating, a new development loomed. A private message, leaked at the perfect moment, threatened to upend everything. Alliances would be questioned, reputations challenged, and the drama would escalate in ways no one had anticipated. Have you ever been in a situation where everything seemed under control, and then, in a single moment, reality flipped upside down? That's exactly what happened on that flight. The borrowed jet, gleaming and pristine, had barely begun its journey when the first warning signs appeared, subtle at first, almost ignorable. A flicker of red on the instrument panel. A gentle beep from the monitoring system. But in the world of aviation, even the tiniest anomaly demands attention. And in this case, the anomaly was about to escalate into full-blown panic. The co-pilot noticed it first, a slight fluctuation in the engine's performance readings. At first, it seemed inconsequential. A temporary hiccup. Machines sometimes miscommunicate. But as seconds ticked by, the fluctuation grew more pronounced, more insistent. The engine's temperature began climbing steadily. Alarms, though quiet at first, became urgent and unmistakable. And then it happened. The first shrill warning tone pierced the cabin. A sound designed to cut through any noise, to demand attention. The crew reacted instantly, trained hands moving with precision. But even their calm professionalism could not erase the rising tension. Meghan and Harry, previously composed, now registered subtle signs of alarm. Eyes widened. Hands clutched armrests. A nervous glance exchanged between them. "Is this serious?" Meghan asked, her voice steady but tinged with anxiety. "Yes," the co-pilot replied, keeping his tone even. "It's manageable, but we need to act fast." Fast. That word carried weight. Because in aviation, fast doesn't just mean a quick response. It means decisions that can determine safety, outcomes, and in this case, reputations. The jet, as luxurious as it was, offered no immunity from the laws of physics, mechanics, or human error. The engine's behavior was unpredictable. It surged, then stabilized, then surged again. Sweat began to bead on foreheads. The tension was a living entity in the cabin, wrapping itself around every passenger and crew member. Flight attendants exchanged subtle signals. Co-pilots discussed contingency procedures in hushed tones, and Meghan and Harry, aware that cameras, both physical and mental, metaphorical and literal, were observing, tried to maintain composure. But luxury, they say, is fragile, and power, unchecked, is no substitute for skill. This flight demanded skill, and suddenly, skill alone was not enough. A cascade of small missteps, minor oversights, and subtle misunderstandings coalesced into a situation that even the most experienced crew could feel slipping from control. As the minutes dragged, the alarms persisted. Red lights glowed with intensity, signaling the engine's rising temperature and the need for immediate corrective action. Procedures, rehearsed countless times in simulations, were executed methodically. Yet, every action taken seemed to reveal another complication. A fluctuation in fuel flow, a misreading in pressure gauges, a delayed response from one of the onboard systems. It was as if the jet itself had become a living puzzle, one whose solution required near-perfect synchronization of humans and machines. And then came a human factor. Harry, ever protective, began questioning instructions, not out of malice, but out of instinct, wanting to understand every step, every decision. Meghan, sensing the rising tension, tried to mediate subtly, offering calm words and gestures to reassure both the crew and her husband. But each interjection, however well-meaning, introduced microsecond delays, minute distractions, and subtle ripples that amplified the complexity of the situation. Questions raced through their minds. What if the engine fails completely? What if we have to make an emergency landing? Will we survive? And beneath these immediate concerns, a deeper worry lingered, the social and personal consequences. Headlines, reputations, and personal relationships were dangling by threads in parallel to the mechanical crisis unfolding in the air. Meanwhile, back on the ground, Elton John's team monitored the telemetry with growing alarm. The data was streaming in real time. Temperatures rising, pressure fluctuating, alarms recorded. Every metric was scrutinized, every number analyzed, every anomaly discussed. Elton himself, though not a pilot, could feel the gravity of the situation pressing down. Trust had been extended. Responsibility had been assumed. And now, every decision made hundreds of feet above ground would have consequences extending far beyond the cabin. Within the cabin, the atmosphere became electric. The luxurious environment, once a sanctuary of calm, now resembled a pressure cooker. The soft hum of the engines was now punctuated by sharp beeps and blinking warning lights. Crew members moved with precision, issuing instructions in controlled tones. Passengers followed as best they could, but each gesture, each action carried the weight of potential catastrophe. Meghan's mind raced. She was thinking of the optics, the public perception. She was thinking of Harry, the crew, and the fragile balance of control. She was also thinking of the enormity of the situation, how quickly a friendly favor could become a headline, a scandal, a story for the tabloids. Harry, meanwhile, shifted between concern for immediate safety and frustration at the unfolding chaos. The stress was palpable, like a storm cloud gathering within the cabin walls. Suddenly, the engine began to make unusual sounds, a low, grinding hum that wasn't part of the standard audio feedback. Crew members exchanged urgent glances. Passengers stiffened. The flight path was adjusted slightly, precautionary maneuvers executed. And then the alarms escalated to a crescendo, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. Every heartbeat in the cabin seemed synchronized to the warning tones. Direct action was required. Procedures were implemented, some executed with flawless precision, others with slight hesitation. In these critical moments, human judgment and mechanical reliability collided. Decisions were instantaneous, yet the weight of consequences lingered, heavy as lead. Every adjustment to fuel flow, every tweak to engine settings, every consultation between pilots was a dance with danger. Meanwhile, the tension between passengers and crew intensified, not through conflict, but through sheer stress. Meghan and Harry, aware of their own influence, tried to maintain calm, but their presence was itself a variable in the controlled chaos. Crew members were trained for emergencies, but not always for emergencies amplified by celebrity scrutiny and the knowledge that the world might soon be watching. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed in a blur of warnings, recalibrations, and subtle panic. Each attempt to stabilize the engine revealed new complications. Temperature readings spiked unexpectedly. Pressure indicators fluctuated. Every successful adjustment seemed temporary, fleeting. And then came the realization that the situation was not just technical. It was psychological. The fear, the tension, the awareness of responsibility. All of it compounded the complexity of the unfolding drama. And just when the crew believed the worst had been temporarily averted, another anomaly appeared. A surge in engine pressure, a spike in temperature, a subtle vibration through the cabin floor. The alarms blared anew. Hearts raced. Minds calculated probabilities, risks, and outcomes in real time. Passengers gripped armrests, knuckles white, eyes wide. And yet, Amid the crisis, an almost surreal calm emerged, not from fearlessness, but from the rhythm of controlled urgency. Crew members moved like clockwork, passengers followed instructions as best they could, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed that the engine's fury could be contained. But then came a sound, subtle but chilling, a metallic click, followed by a faint shudder through the cabin. Everyone froze. The co-pilot checked instruments, cross-referenced readings, recalibrated controls. The alarm continued, relentless, unyielding. The engine, once a symbol of power and reliability, now seemed unpredictable, almost sentient in its defiance. And as the plane began its final descent toward the destination, a new complication emerged, the missing car waiting on the tarmac. An apparently minor logistical detail, yet now magnified in the minds of everyone on board. Panic and frustration mingled with fatigue. Eyes scanned the horizon, hearts pounded, and the realization dawned that the ordeal was far from over. The engine, though temporarily stabilized, was a constant reminder of vulnerability. The passengers, though experienced in public appearances, were suddenly navigating an environment where mistakes could be fatal. The borrowed jet, a gift of trust, had become a crucible of responsibility, fear, and human limitation. Have you ever been in a situation where a small detail spirals into a full-blown crisis? For Meghan and Harry, landing the jet should have marked the relief of survival, the satisfaction of a journey completed under pressure. But instead, the first shock awaited them on the tarmac. The car meant to transport them to their next destination was nowhere to be found. Vanished. Gone. A simple logistic arrangement had become the epicenter of a new scandal. Imagine the scene. The jet's tires squealing as they touched down, the crew moving with precise urgency, passengers relieved yet exhausted. And then the realization. The luxury vehicle, the one meticulously arranged to meet the royalty, was missing. Panic wasn't immediate, it was insidious. A slow, creeping dread as assistants called the parking coordinators, security personnel scoured the hangar, and private messages were sent in a frantic attempt to locate the missing car. How can it just disappear? Meghan asked, voice measured but laced with frustration. Harry's jaw tightened. We were promised everything would be ready. How does a car just vanish? It seems almost ridiculous, doesn't it? A missing car on a private tarmac. But in the world of high-profile celebrities, royals, and billionaires, details like this are not trivial. They are symbolic. A missing car is not just an inconvenience. It's a crack in the armor, a visible signal that control has slipped. And when control slips, perception shifts. The crew's reactions mirrored the tension. Their eyes darted to the empty space where the vehicle should have been. Security radios buzzed with conflicting information. Ground staff were scrambling, each person a tiny cog in a mechanism that suddenly seemed to be malfunctioning. A missed communication here, a delayed response there, and what should have been a seamless transition became a chaotic spectacle. Meghan and Harry were acutely aware of the optics. The world was watching, cameras were ready, social media would catch every moment, and the narrative could spiral out of control in seconds. Even if the issue was trivial in reality, the perception was catastrophic. This wasn't just a missing vehicle. It was a symbol of mismanagement, oversight, and a subtle loss of dignity. Hours, or at least it felt like hours, passed in a frenzy of searches, calls, and frantic coordination. Every corner of the hangar was scoured. Security cameras were reviewed. Assistants ran from one area to another, and still, no sign of the vehicle. The situation became a mix of absurdity and terror, a real-life drama that no Hollywood writer could have staged convincingly. Questions began to arise, quietly at first, then with urgency. Had the car been misplaced? Stolen? Hijacked? Or, in the most damning scenario, was it an act of negligence by someone who assumed that royal guests would tolerate any oversight? Each possibility carried its own consequences, each more severe than the last. And for Meghan and Harry, there was little patience for excuses. Their journey had already been marked by turbulence, literally and figuratively, and now this added a layer of humiliation they could not ignore. Meanwhile, on the ground, Elton John's team was monitoring the situation with a mix of alarm and disbelief. The jet incident had been tense, yes, But a missing car added a new dimension of complexity. Trust had been extended, responsibilities assigned. Now, accountability was being questioned on multiple fronts. Elton's reputation, while robust, was not immune to public perception. One misstep, one missing vehicle, could become a viral narrative that overshadowed the earlier crisis. As the minutes stretched into what felt like eternity, theories began to emerge. Was it a simple administrative error? Someone forgot to schedule the car properly? Was it a deliberate oversight, an act of sabotage, or a misunderstanding amplified by chaos? Each theory, more speculative than the last, fueled anxiety in the cabin. Meghan and Harry, already emotionally taxed by the flight, found themselves navigating another storm. This one grounded but no less intense. The absence of the car also amplified interpersonal tension. Staff members exchanged terse words. Ground crews pointed fingers subtly, each defensive explanation only adding fuel to the fire. Meghan's patience, usually measured and composed, was tested. Harry, protective yet frustrated, began questioning protocols, demanding accountability. Every second spent searching for the car heightened emotional stakes, and every failed solution increased public visibility in ways that were impossible to control. And then came the first sign of public awareness. Social media, always vigilant for the slightest crack in celebrity perfection, began circulating images of the jet, the tarmac, and the conspicuous absence of the promised car. Hashtags emerged, some humorous, others critical. Hashtag missing car crisis, hashtag royal fumble, hashtag Elton jet drama. Within minutes, the story became fodder for global audiences. What started as a minor logistic mishap was now a spectacle with international visibility. In the midst of this chaos, Meghan and Harry were faced with choices. Should they address the situation publicly or maintain silence to preserve dignity? Should they confront staff directly, demanding explanations, or rely on the invisible mechanisms of protocol? Every choice carried weight. Every response could be dissected, misinterpreted, and amplified. In this environment, even minor emotional reactions became magnified, and the pressure was nearly unbearable. Meanwhile, speculation continued to escalate. Some suggested the car had been accidentally towed. Others wondered if it had been stolen in a coordinated act of sabotage. A few speculated that perhaps it had never existed in the way it was promised, a logistical miscommunication with far-reaching implications. Each theory spread rapidly, feeding the narrative of chaos, error, and drama. And yet, within this whirlwind, a crucial fact emerged. The missing car was not merely a vehicle. It represented a chain of trust, a reflection of responsibility, and a tangible link between privilege and accountability. Losing it, whether by accident or oversight, became a symbol of much larger issues. The fragility of carefully constructed appearances, the volatility of celebrity relationships, and the consequences of mismanagement when the stakes are impossibly high. Meghan and Harry, navigating their emotions with practiced composure, were forced into crisis management in real time. Calm gestures, diplomatic phrasing, and measured words masked the storm brewing inside. Staff members were scrambling, ground crews coordinating under pressure, and Elton John's team monitoring from afar. The atmosphere, already charged, now hummed with urgency, tension, and the faint hum of rising panic. Hours into the ordeal, small breakthroughs occurred. A ground crew member reported a possible sighting in a remote section of the hangar. Security footage revealed the car in an unexpected location, parked away from its designated spot. Relief surged, but only briefly, because locating the vehicle didn't erase the humiliation, the stress, or the narrative that had already begun to take shape. Headlines would not wait for resolution. Perception was already forming in the public eye. Questions lingered, and not just logistical ones. Who was responsible? Was it an innocent mistake, or was there negligence at play? Could such a minor oversight escalate into a broader public scandal? In the world of high-profile celebrities, the line between personal error and public catastrophe is razor thin. And for Meghan and Harry, every misstep carried repercussions far beyond their immediate control. And then came the final blow. A private communication, intended to remain confidential, was inadvertently leaked to someone with social media access. The content hinted at blame, frustration, and internal tension. Suddenly, the missing car was no longer just a logistic problem. It was evidence, proof, and ammunition. Conversations that should have remained behind the scenes were now subject to public scrutiny, judgment, and speculation. And as Meghan and Harry finally approached the vehicle, relief was tempered by the understanding that the ordeal was far from over. The missing car had set in motion a chain of events that would escalate trust issues, strain relationships, and create public narratives that would haunt them for weeks. Have you ever seen someone lose control in a way that leaves everyone around them both terrified and awestruck? That's exactly the scene that unfolded when Elton John learned the full extent of what had transpired. The borrowed jet had landed safely, yes. But the engine overload, the missing car, and the mounting public spectacle were enough to push even the calmest and most composed celebrity to the edge. And Elton, known for his flair and exacting standards, was anything but calm. It started with a text, or rather, a series of messages, short, pointed, and brimming with frustration. What happened? Explain immediately. This is unacceptable. The messages weren't just words. They were detonators, setting off waves of panic and self-reflection for everyone involved. Meghan and Harry, already emotionally drained, now faced the added weight of Elton's fury. It wasn't just a reprimand, it was a storm. Elton's initial reaction was a mixture of disbelief and anger. How could something that was supposed to be seamless spiral so catastrophically? How could trusted guests, people he considered friends, contribute to a situation that risked not only his property, but his reputation? It wasn't just about the engine or the missing car. It was about trust, responsibility, and the unspoken rules of decorum. And in the world of high-profile celebrities, these rules are sacred. The crew on the ground relayed updates. Technical issues solved. Car located, though in a manner that suggested negligence. Social media, as expected, had already begun to amplify the story. Images of the jet, the tarmac, and the subtle chaos had gone viral within minutes. Headlines were crafted, memes circulated, hashtags trended, hashtag jet drama, hashtag royal fumble, hashtag Elton versus royals. The narrative was no longer contained. It was global, relentless, and unforgiving. And then came Elton's public declaration. Not in a press release, not in a formal statement, but through carefully chosen private communications that would inevitably leak. Messages went out to his inner circle. This is the last straw. No more favors. No more exceptions. They've crossed a line. The intensity of his words left no room for negotiation, no space for excuses. It was definitive, absolute, and irrevocable. For Meghan and Harry, the impact was immediate and profound. A simple favor, a borrowed jet, had transformed into a rupture in relationships, a public spectacle, and a personal crisis. The shock wasn't just in Elton's anger, but in the speed and finality of his decision. There would be no second chance, no room for missteps to be forgiven. The cutoff was complete. But it wasn't just anger. Elton's reaction carried layers of personal betrayal. He had extended trust, opened his property, and created an environment of goodwill. And in return, the experience had become a public debacle, a headline story, and a testament to lapses in judgment. For someone who meticulously curated his world, this felt like a violation, a personal affront wrapped in the guise of a favor. The messages continued. Explanations demanded, timelines questioned, accountability required. Behind the polished exterior, Elton's team scrambled to manage the unfolding narrative. Social media would interpret every reaction, every nuance, every message. And in a world where perception often outweighs reality, the consequences were almost immediate. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry attempted damage control. Calm, measured gestures, diplomatic phrasing, subtle acknowledgments of missteps. But each action, however strategic, was observed under intense scrutiny. Every word could be interpreted, misinterpreted, and amplified. The air was thick with tension, every interaction a potential misstep, every sigh a headline waiting to happen. As hours passed, the crew attempted to mediate between the furious property owner and the increasingly anxious passengers. Meetings, phone calls, and text exchanges created a web of communication that was both necessary and chaotic. Emotions ran high. Pride clashed with accountability. Authority collided with expectation. The delicate balance of public image and private grievance teetered on the edge of collapse. And then came the leaks. Private messages, intended for internal circulation only, found their way into public discourse. Social media exploded. Speculation became rampant. Friends were taking sides. Critics seized the narrative. Suddenly, the jet incident was no longer a private mishap. It was a global spectacle, a saga of entitlement, responsibility, and fury. Emotional tension spiked. Meghan and Harry were forced to navigate a dual reality. The technical aftermath of the flight and the social consequences of Elton's anger. Anxiety, frustration, and subtle fear colored their responses. Each glance, each gesture, each word was loaded with the knowledge that their actions were being dissected worldwide. And the humiliation of public judgment weighed heavily, like a physical presence in the room. The flight crew, though trained for emergencies, now found themselves mediating interpersonal drama of an intensity few had ever encountered. Instructions were precise, but emotions complicated execution. Decisions had to be made not just with safety in mind, but with public perception, celebrity status, and social consequence. Every move mattered. Every moment carried weight. And yet, amidst the chaos, a deeper truth emerged. This was more than a technical error or logistical oversight. This was a rupture of trust, a breakdown of relationships, and a demonstration of how privilege and responsibility collide in the most dramatic ways. The borrowed jet was a catalyst, the engine overload a symptom, and the missing car a symbol. Together, they created a perfect storm, one that tested alliances, patience, and the very nature of friendship. By the evening, the full impact of Elton's decision was clear. He was done. There would be no further engagement, no extended trust, no leniency. The message was unmistakable. Privileges come with responsibilities, and trust, once broken, can be final. The ripples of this fury would extend far beyond the immediate circle. Public perception, social media, and the media frenzy would ensure that the story reached every corner of the globe. And just when Meghan and Harry thought they might catch a breath, another twist emerged. A private communication, accidentally intercepted, suggested internal sabotage or miscommunication within Elton's team. Questions of loyalty, blame, and accountability now intertwined with public perception and media frenzy. The stakes escalated further, showing that even in high-profile friendships, no one is immune from the consequences of oversight, misunderstanding, or mismanagement. And as the night fell, the reality became undeniable. The fury wasn't over, the fallout was intensifying, and the drama was far from contained. Every message, every decision, every subtle gesture had the potential to redefine relationships, reputations, and public perception. And with that, a new chapter of scandal, tension, and intrigue began. How quickly can a private mishap turn into a global sensation? Faster than you think. For Meghan and Harry, the borrowed jet disaster was no longer confined to the tarmac, the engine overload, or the missing car. Within hours, social media had exploded, gossip columns were saturated, and mainstream news outlets were circling like vultures. What started as a private crisis had become public spectacle, and the world was watching with insatiable curiosity. Imagine opening your phone to discover your private life has become the subject of memes, hashtags, and endless speculation. Hashtags like #EltonJetDrama and #RoyalFumble trended within minutes. Every click, every share, every comment amplified the story. And every social media post, no matter how trivial, carried weight, shaping perception and solidifying narrative. Suddenly, the stakes were higher than ever, not just about trust and responsibility, but about public opinion, reputation, and legacy. News outlets wasted no time. Articles ran with bold headlines. Royal couple's jet drama. Elton John cuts ties. Engine overload and a missing car. Meghan and Harry's chaotic flight. Each headline intensified the narrative, emphasizing drama and scandal over context. The media's obsession was relentless, turning a technical mishap into a character-defining moment. For Meghan and Harry, every glance, every gesture, every expression was now under microscopic scrutiny. The frenzy wasn't limited to text. Social media platforms were flooded with videos, photos, and commentary. Fans, critics, and trolls alike dissected every detail. Some blamed the couple outright, painting them as careless and entitled. Others questioned Elton's expectations, suggesting that even royalty could not escape the unpredictability of human error. In a matter of hours, private decisions had transformed into public spectacle, with opinions forming faster than any crisis management team could respond. Meghan and Harry attempted to navigate the storm with calculated poise. Press releases were carefully worded, subtle gestures were measured, and appearances were orchestrated to convey calm and control. Yet, the very act of managing the narrative drew attention. The media scrutinized every word, every phrase, every subtle nuance. Nothing was private anymore. Every action became evidence in a story the public was consuming voraciously. Meanwhile, memes and viral posts added a layer of absurdity to the drama. Some depicted the jet as a runaway vehicle. Others imagined the couple searching frantically for the missing car. Humor, irony, and exaggeration amplified tension while simultaneously mocking the very real stakes. Public perception became a mix of entertainment and judgment, a volatile cocktail that fueled further scrutiny. The media frenzy also affected those behind the scenes. Crew members, assistants, and security personnel were now unwitting participants in a story that had taken on a life of its own. Casual remarks, minor errors, and small gestures became fodder for speculation. Accountability, blame, and narrative control became central to every decision, adding layers of stress and complexity to an already high-pressure situation. As the hours progressed, the story evolved. Early reports of engine overload gave way to accounts of interpersonal tension, miscommunications, and the dramatic fallout of Elton John's fury. The narrative expanded, encompassing betrayal, error, and scandal. Each update, each leak, each social media post fed the public's appetite for intrigue. What was a technical problem had transformed into a character study, a spectacle of human behavior under pressure. The frenzy also had psychological effects. Meghan and Harry, constantly aware of public scrutiny, experienced heightened stress and anxiety. Every gesture was calculated, yet the weight of judgment pressed down relentlessly. The crew, trained for emergencies but not for global judgment, struggled to balance professionalism with the awareness of being observed by millions. Even Elton's team, monitoring the unfolding chaos, recognized that perception often mattered more than reality in the court of public opinion. And yet, amid the frenzy, subtle truths emerged. Some reporters began to question the accuracy of early accounts. Others delved into the technical details of the engine, exploring how minor anomalies can escalate into major alarms. Analysts discussed the challenges of celebrity travel, the pressures of public perception, and the fragility of trust when reputations and privilege intersect. While much of the coverage emphasized drama, a layer of nuanced analysis added complexity to the narrative, highlighting how multifaceted the situation truly was. The frenzy also prompted reactions from unexpected quarters. Public figures, influencers, and commentators offered opinions, often exacerbating the story. Former colleagues, acquaintances, and even distant friends weighed in. Social media amplifiers ensured that every comment, every opinion, every judgment reached global audiences in minutes. For Meghan and Harry, navigating this environment required constant awareness, careful messaging, and strategic planning. Every move carried consequences. Amid the chaos, some moments of absurdity provided relief. Memes exaggerated scenarios, imagining outlandish consequences. Planes teetering on the edge of runways, royal panic over luxury amenities, and exaggerated depictions of Elton's fury. Humor, irony, and satire provided levity, but also underscored the intensity of public scrutiny. The story had become simultaneously serious, ridiculous, and unignorable. As the frenzy escalated, the couple faced critical choices. Should they engage with the media directly, attempting to shape the narrative? Should they remain silent, letting the story unfold independently? Every decision was a balancing act between transparency, control, and the inevitable unpredictability of public reaction. One misstep could magnify the drama exponentially. Meanwhile, Elton John's team monitored the situation with a combination of concern and strategy. Damage control, messaging, and private communications became paramount. Every leak, every headline, every social media post was analyzed for potential consequences. The incident, initially a private mishap, had evolved into a public relations maelstrom, testing the skills and patience of everyone involved. And just when it seemed the frenzy had reached its peak, another twist emerged. A private message, meant only for internal circulation, leaked to the public. The content suggested blame, frustration, and possibly even sabotage within Elton's team. Suddenly, the narrative expanded again, intertwining responsibility, reputation, and personal relationships in ways that no one had anticipated. The media frenzy, relentless and omnipresent, had become more than a story. It was a force shaping perception, influencing behavior, and amplifying every nuance of the crisis. For Meghan and Harry, navigating this whirlwind required skill, composure, and strategic thinking. For Elton John, it underscored the stakes of generosity, trust, and celebrity influence. And for the world, it became a spectacle that combined scandal, suspense, and human drama in equal measure. Have you ever wondered what happens when a private mishap becomes a public scandal that reaches the highest levels of power? For Meghan and Harry, the borrowed jet debacle had just gone from embarrassing to politically charged. Headlines and social media weren't just echoing their mistakes. They were reaching Buckingham Palace, rippling through royal advisors, and stirring tension among advisors who now had to calculate not just logistics, but reputation management on a global scale. The palace operates like a finely tuned machine. Every action, every public appearance, every word spoken carries weight. And when Meghan and Harry's flight chaos hit the news cycle, the gears inside that machine started grinding. Advisors were pulled from meetings, security briefings were reprioritized, and communications officers scrambled to assess both the damage and the narrative. For a moment, the royal household felt like it was teetering on the edge of a very public storm. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, whispers filled the corridors. Courtiers exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain about how to advise the king or the queen consort. Are we going to control this narrative? One advisor asked, voice tight with urgency. Or are we letting social media dictate terms? The answer was clear. Neither the king nor the advisors wanted the monarchy overshadowed by a private jet scandal. But containment would be difficult, almost impossible, in the age of viral news and relentless global scrutiny. Public image was critical. Royals are symbols, embodiments of tradition, dignity, and authority. Any perceived slip-up, any hint of irresponsibility, is magnified, dissected, and transformed into commentary that travels faster than any palace decree. Meghan and Harry had not only borrowed a jet, they had inadvertently triggered a cascade of misperception, fueling headlines, memes, and viral commentary that now demanded intervention at the highest levels. The palace's communications team worked overtime, coordinating statements, monitoring press coverage, and attempting to craft responses that were both measured and authoritative. Every word was calculated, every nuance considered, every message vetted for potential misinterpretation. But even the most meticulously crafted communications could not control social media speculation, leaks, or the relentless cycle of gossip. And then came the private letters. Confidential memos from royal advisors to Meghan and Harry outlined concerns about public perception, trust, and the optics of the jet incident. They weren't accusatory, but the tone was clear. Responsibility had been breached, and consequences were unavoidable. Reading these letters, Meghan and Harry were forced to confront not just technical mistakes or logistical failures, but the broader implications of behavior under the global spotlight. Inside the palace, debates raged. Should the couple face formal reprimands? Should restrictions be imposed on future engagements? Should the incident be handled quietly or publicly acknowledged? Every option carried potential fallout. Every decision risked inflaming tension or escalating scrutiny. Royals operate within strict protocols, but this scenario was anything but ordinary. A private jet mishap had become a test of discretion, diplomacy, and authority. Outside the palace walls, public commentary intensified. Journalists connected dots, speculated about interpersonal tensions, and examined the relationship between Meghan, Harry, and Elton John. Headlines were crafted with dramatic flair. royal privilege, or negligence? Elton John cuts ties. What does this mean for the royals? Social media hashtags multiplied, fueling endless debate about responsibility, entitlement, and loyalty. Within this maelstrom, Meghan and Harry had to navigate internal fallout, balancing their personal feelings with public image. Emotional tension ran high. Frustration, shame, and anxiety mingled with the desire to assert autonomy and control. Every meeting, every discussion, every interaction was charged with stakes that extended beyond the immediate crisis. Even the king, historically composed, was drawn into the vortex. Advisors presented detailed briefings, outlining the public narrative, potential repercussions, and recommended courses of action. Each briefing was designed to balance caution with assertiveness, but the underlying message was clear. The couple's behavior had consequences not only for themselves, but for the perception of the monarchy. And then came the leaks. Internal communications, meant to remain confidential, found their way into the press. Leaked memos, emails, and private conversations amplified tensions, exposing the palace's attempts to manage the narrative while simultaneously highlighting the high-profile drama unfolding behind the scenes. What was intended to be discreet and controlled had become another chapter in a public saga. For Meghan and Harry, the royal fallout was personal and political. Privilege had collided with accountability. Decisions made in private had ramifications in public. Relationships were strained, alliances tested, and reputations hung precariously in the balance. Every action taken to contain the situation was scrutinized, dissected, and debated. Even small gestures, reassuring words, phone calls, or strategic appearances, were analyzed as evidence of competence or failure. The media frenzy and palace fallout created a pressure cooker environment. Friends and allies offered support, but the situation was complicated by public visibility and the immediacy of judgment. Every conversation, every decision, every effort to rectify the situation became a performance, a delicate balancing act between sincerity and strategic messaging. As hours turned into days, it became evident that the incident's ripple effects would last far longer than anticipated. Trust was fractured, not just between Elton John and the couple, but within the royal household itself. Advisors, courtiers, and security personnel began reassessing protocols, communication methods, and contingency plans for high-profile engagements. One misstep, it seemed, could trigger crises of similar magnitude. But amid the tension, another layer of complexity emerged. Private recordings and messages hinted at disagreements within the palace itself. Different advisors had conflicting interpretations of the situation. Was the jet mishap a symptom of poor planning or a reflection of the couple's behavior? Should the public narrative be shaped to emphasize sympathy or accountability? These internal debates added fuel to the fire, creating uncertainty, frustration, and a sense of urgency that permeated every corner of the royal network. Meghan and Harry, already grappling with their own anxiety, found themselves navigating a web of expectations, judgments, and invisible protocols. Every choice mattered. Every word could be scrutinized. Every action could be misinterpreted. The borrowed jet, once a symbol of luxury and trust, had become a catalyst for far-reaching consequences, testing the boundaries of influence, responsibility, and public perception. And as the palace attempted to stabilize the narrative, a new revelation surfaced. A confidential letter, accidentally leaked, suggested that internal disagreements were more serious than anyone anticipated. Advisors were questioning each other, responsibilities were being reassigned, and the optics of the jet incident threatened to overshadow broader royal operations. The situation had escalated from embarrassment to crisis, and the fallout showed no signs of abating. Have you ever wondered what really happens behind closed doors when a high-profile disaster unfolds? For Meghan and Harry, the borrowed jet fiasco had already spiraled into public embarrassment and palace scrutiny. But the real story, the one no one outside a handful of insiders knew, was far more explosive. What happened on that plane, the subtle mistakes, the whispered conversations, and the overlooked warnings, was about to come to light in a way that would shock everyone. It began with a message, sent in confidence but intercepted in the digital ether. A crew member, anxious and loyal, had documented irregularities during the flight. small details that at first seemed insignificant, but which together painted a picture of a near-miss disaster. Engine readings had fluctuated beyond protocol norms, safety procedures had been misunderstood, and certain instructions had been ignored, not maliciously, but through a combination of inexperience and entitlement. Elton John's team, now fully aware of the scale of the chaos, began piecing together the timeline. Every conversation, every interaction, every seemingly minor choice during the flight was scrutinized. The more they investigated, the more alarming the findings became. For example, one co-pilot's log revealed that fuel pressure dipped dangerously at one point, a fluctuation that had been temporarily corrected but could have had catastrophic consequences if not managed with precision. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry were unaware that the smallest details of their actions were being documented, analyzed, and judged. A comment made to a crew member about seating arrangements, a casual dismissal of a procedural instruction, even a delayed response to a safety warning. All of these details were now part of a growing dossier that painted a complex picture of human error layered over a highly technical situation. But the revelations didn't stop with flight logs. Maintenance reports, checked pre-flight, revealed that certain alerts had been ignored in the rush to accommodate a high-profile departure. Routine checks that might have prevented the engine overload had been performed but interpreted incorrectly. These were subtle, almost invisible failures, but in combination, they explained why a simple journey could have escalated into a near crisis in the air. And then came the communications. Private messages exchanged between assistants, advisors, and Elton's personal team revealed a chain of warnings, oversights, and miscommunications. Some messages hinted that the missing car wasn't just a logistical oversight. It may have been inadvertently parked in the wrong hangar by someone following outdated instructions. Others revealed frustration, panic, and quiet fury as staff tried to manage both the mechanical crisis and the social fallout simultaneously. The combination of technical reports and private communications revealed something more unsettling. The event was not merely an accident. It was a perfect storm of privilege, human error, and procedural gaps. A failure in attention, magnified by the pressures of celebrity status, had transformed minor issues into headline-making drama. Every decision, every lapse, every oversight had consequences far beyond the tarmac. For Meghan and Harry, these revelations, once they became public, would redefine the narrative entirely. The initial perception, that of careless or entitled royals causing havoc, was only part of the story. The full truth, as pieced together from logs, messages, and eyewitness accounts, exposed the fragility of even the most luxurious and meticulously maintained systems when human judgment is compromised. What made this story even more compelling was the emotional layer. Crew members, initially silent to maintain professionalism, now admitted to feeling anxious, intimidated, and even frustrated by the couple's responses during the flight. Their observations revealed a mix of politeness, apprehension, and subtle tension.